And I thought I raised her from the dead. She's alive. But I can't wait to see her again one day.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares.
Hello from Boulder, Colorado, my last night here. And we're going to look again at MICA'S ex saying, I can't wait to see her again. Sniff, sniff. And so we're going to be dealing with that in this analysis. Welcome to the most authentic community in true crime. What do you think of the other communities out there? That is going to be one of the topics of this discussion. Now, Pastor John Paul Miller's May 5th memorial service for Micah certainly did a better job of remembering her than the by the way postscript he left at the end of the other service, right? There were earnest squeaks and crocodile tears and scarcely believable claims of wanting to or trying to resurrect his dead ex-wife. And one couldn't help wondering, if Micah was raised from the dead, what would happen? Would Micah and John Paul be a couple again? Would he still be tipping waitresses with his phone number, tracking her car and slashing her tires? Would they be walking on the beach hand in hand? Somewhere in his sermon, his eulogy, he said, each time it still didn't hit me. I thought she was going to wake up. I even tried to raise her from the dead one time this week. Now, I would like to say that this isn't the first time I've ever heard and seen this level of nonsense. I'd like to say it's the first time, but it's not. Have you ever been in a religious setting where fanciful things were said that were clearly not believable? When I regularly attended church, our pastor traveled to a country called Mozambique, which is on Africa's east coast. It's sort of above South Africa. And he was warned to take anti-malarials. But because he'd never taken medicine in his life, he ignored what he was told. He promptly got malaria, and then he was expected to receive medication for it when he got home. His name was Pastor Brian, and he decided that this was a test of his faith, and he still wouldn't take the medication. Well, guess what happened? He ultimately died, leaving a family of 5 children. I mean, if you think about that, that is literally putting your faith where your mouth is, but then paying also the ultimate price. Because what message did that actually send? The church later contacted me and they said they were going to hold a kind of seance. They were going to pray for him for 3 days and raise him from the dead. I said, well, you know what, I'm not going to be part of this. He should have taken his medication and he's dead. You know that permanent condition that exists in the real world. And the church folks said at the time, this is going to be the biggest miracle ever. Nick, you need to be here. When we raise him from the dead, if you don't participate, we're going to remember your lack of faith. Well, I didn't show up for that. And Pastor Brian wasn't raised from the dead, despite the congregation praying hysterically for 3 days around his dead body. Now, Pastor John Paul says, if I had 10 hours, it wouldn't be enough to tell you all the great things about her. Well, he didn't take 10 hours. He barely took 10 minutes. He took all of about 20 minutes to eulogize her, mostly just going through a couple of photos and talking about them and kind of making a couple of jokes and saying superficial things like, his feet were sore from walking a lot and how she would expect him to stand, right? And a lot of it seemed to me fake and made up, like running into a sister in a mall and thinking he had actually raised her from the dead. Do you know anyone who has been raised from the dead? It's a serious question. So this is something that is being said in his sermon, that, I actually thought I'd raised her from the dead. Had he ever raised anyone from the dead? Do you know anyone that's been raised from the dead? I don't mean in like the biblical sense, like Lazarus, going back 1,000 years. I mean, in your lifetime, has anyone been raised from the dead as far as you know? I mean, days after they've died. When last did you read anything in the news about that? And so I want to talk a little bit about the reality of death, but also the reality of reality. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Also, please note I do have a Spotify channel, so please Google True Crime Rocket Science Spotify and you'll see that. Please subscribe to that channel as well. You can get the advanced audio of many of these videos there before they appear here. You can also, if you're enjoying this analysis, you can like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So, the reality of death, if you choose to accept it, is that it's terrifyingly permanent. I mean, you're not just dead, you're dead forever. You're dead for the fullness of time. You were alive for a brief, kind of fleeting moment. And in comparison to that, death is a terrifyingly long time, an infinite period of darkness. It's a legitimate source of anxiety, if you really think about it. And so it's only in the movies that Superman dies and comes back to life. If death was as fictional as we're led to believe, and someone died and the next thing you saw them walking around, you would have kind of a zombie apocalypse. People would be terrified. People would be running around. That person came out of a graveyard. Now, some viewers of the memorial service were quick to bash the pastor's eulogy, including one who ripped the widower's remarks as a fake, sad act and damage control. That's according to the reporting in the New York Post. But I mean, there are no real noddy badges for people who recognized this as damage control or a fake, sad act. Someone said, "This was so uncomfortable to watch, seemed so insincere." Someone else said, "This is such a low level of blasphemy." Now, while I think we can't help but wonder how the Solid Rock Church built up what appears to be a fairly healthy and loyal following, while it's easy to want to blame Micah's death entirely on her ex-husband, it's easy to do that. And there's certainly cause to do that. I think we need to be careful ourselves of worshipping the God of blame, of in our own cases, worshipping the God of blame. Do you know what I mean when I say that? What happens when we're encouraged to constantly blame others for their sins? Someone is constantly lying, cheating, stealing, killing, manipulating. It's always somebody else that's doing something that's unacceptable, that's crossing a line, that's breaking the law. It's always somebody else who is doing something wrong. What if you're constantly focusing on other people doing something that's wrong? Well, don't we risk giving away the responsibility, that's the responsibility we ought to have for leading and directing our own lives? Now just think about that. The amount of time you spend thinking about someone else who did something they shouldn't have done. The amount of time you spend on someone else who did something that they shouldn't have done. And maybe you're right, they shouldn't have done it. But how much time are you spending on that and not on your own life? Not on what someone else shouldn't have done, but on what you should be doing, present tense. You're still alive. You haven't done anything wrong. You've got your freedom. You're innocent. You're a law-abiding citizen. You have your life. What are you going to do with it? What are you doing with it? Are you doing anything with it? Now, if everything that has ever gone wrong in our lives is someone else's fault, just think about this. If everything that has ever gone wrong in your life or my life is someone else's fault, let's say, such as in Micah's case, then doesn't that suggest someone else has complete agency over our lives? Do you accept that? If everything that has gone wrong in my life or your life or someone else's life is someone else's fault, then when do you begin to have a conversation about that person's agency of their own life? Or is that not a conversation worth having, not a thought worth thinking? And if you do think about it, I think you've also got to say, how did that happen? How did you lose agency over your life? Well, one way to do that is to constantly focus on someone else's life and on what they're doing wrong. When we put our faith in people we shouldn't, and someone abuses it, and we do it again and again, even if it is legitimately someone else's fault for taking advantage of us, when are we ever responsible for our own decisions and our own critical thinking? If you watch an ad on TV and the ad misleads you into buying something that you don't really want, and you waste that money and you get the product and you throw it away and you do it again and you do it again and you do it again, is it really somebody else's fault for being taken advantage of? When does it become your responsibility to think carefully about what you're doing? So I don't want this to seem like I'm pointing fingers. I think this is something we need to all address in our own situation. And to do that, I'm going to share an experience I've had that was pretty crazy. Just this past weekend, I experienced a flight cancellation for the first time ever. So it's not something I'm used to dealing with. And it was quite scary. It was a lot of money that I lost, and I kind of did go into slight panic. And then in the effort to get a refund, I came perilously close to being scammed out of literally hundreds of dollars. I wasn't scammed at the end of the day, but if I had been scammed, who would be at fault? What do scammers prey on? Well, they prey on impatience, they prey on being emotional, they prey on wanting instant results, quick results, they prey on quick and easy solutions to sometimes complicated problems, but they also prey in a much more basic way on the shallow greed and thoughtlessness of people. And I was greedy. I was greedy to get my money back. I was thoughtless, thinking that it would be quite simple to do. Somebody said, "We've escalated the problem. We want to give you a refund right now." And I thought it was going to be quite simple until I saw the light and thought critically about what was happening. Because you want to believe that there's going to be a positive outcome that's going to benefit you. So there are not going to be any naughty badges from this channel for spotting insincerity when it comes to MICA'S X, because it's blindingly obvious. The naughty badges are for spotting issues in your own life, like you being scammed. You might be being scammed right now, where you're paying for something that you didn't know, that you're subscribing to something that you don't really want to be subscribed to. I want to ask you to try to think along lines we'd rather not think about, such as when we make mistakes, when we've trusted someone, when we've invested time or money in something that we obviously shouldn't have. And so I'll go first again. When I was in my 20s, I was in a relationship, a meaningful relationship, quite a serious relationship, someone I thought I was in love with. And yet throughout this period, I had this recurring dream that I don't think I've had since or about anybody else. I had this dream that this person that I was with was always in another room. And then when I'd go into that room, she'd be in the next room. And when I went into the next room, she'd be... So she was always kind of somewhere else. But it seemed like not in a physical sense, but in a psychological sense. Many years later, she came out as being gay. And so what was actually taking place there? My subconscious was vindicated for trying to alert my consciousness to something it wouldn't or couldn't see. Isn't that actually incredible? That you actually have the capacity to see things, but not if you're going to consciously ignore it, consciously override it, consciously put your consciousness into areas where there's not much going on, like somebody else's life. Put your consciousness into your life, into the now. Now, in true crime, believe it or not, there are scammers as well, just like this pastor who tell you what you want to hear or what they think you want to hear. And they stir you up, and they do it quite successfully. You can see by their viewer numbers and their subscription growth just how successful and popular they are. And many of them make money at your expense. You might say, how's it at my expense? How do I lose in this equation? Well, guess what? They prey on your natural biases, your anxieties, your addiction to simple black and white tabloid-like stories filled with indignation, blaming, and shock value. They prey on your need to feel emotional and to feel drama about certain things. And it's a tried and tested formula. Something happens and there's a very simple but actually wrong answer. But you get that certainty where somebody else might say they're not sure, or the police are saying they're still investigating. And it's the same thing, the same theme repeated over and over again. And what does it do? It trains your mind to imagine the world as worse than it really is, but also a more simplified version of the world than it really is. And it represents reality in a maligned and manipulated way, which makes it harder to tell what is real and what isn't. These people collectively reinforcing this idea of a simplified reality is making it harder for you to actually understand what is real. But one thing you can count on with all of what is going on here is the following: exaggeration, drama, being emotional about everything. And life's not like that. Life is often difficult. Sometimes it's dull. It's not emotional. It's just dull. It's boring. An hour goes by, not very much happens. Life is often subtle. There are nuances to when things are going well, and nuances to when things are not going well, and nuances where things are not going well within a scenario of things going well, or where things aren't going well, something is going well, like a little vein of hope through that. Life is often a struggle. Life is not clear-cut. We often only understand our decisions and ourselves in the rearview mirror. What we feed ourselves every day, does it feed resilience or feeble-mindedness? Let me say that again. What we feed ourselves every day, does it feed resilience or feeble-mindedness? Are we encouraged to go down psychological paths of least resistance, which is where scammers try to lead us? Or are we encouraged to think? I could just stop there. Are we encouraged to think more carefully and cautiously about facts while acknowledging uncertainties? Because that's the other thing. People love to be certain and emotional in their certainty about things. But reality tends to be filled with uncertainties and that kind of makes us anxious. When we're certain about something, we feel, in a way, less anxious. We feel that we know what something is. Life is also full of known unknowns, but also unknown unknowns. Do we like to acknowledge those? So I want to challenge you in a different way to many other true crime channels, but I also want you to challenge yourself. I don't want you to just be challenged because I'm asking you to. I want you to get that feeling of, you know what, I think maybe it is time I challenge myself. Maybe challenge yourself to be more physical. Maybe challenge yourself to think in areas that make you uncomfortable. When you allow yourself to struggle and experience pain, that is actually how you develop resilience. That is what physical training is all about. And Lucy Charles Barkley, the woman who won the Ironman, who ran the entire run on a calf tear, the reason she had that resilience was because she had been so uncomfortable so often when she did that. How often do you make yourself uncomfortable in your thinking? Or do you always want to be as comfortable? Do you want the convenient truth? Do you want to hear what you want to hear? I would have liked Micah to have seen through Pastor John Paul a lot earlier and been a lot more resilient. But the truth is, I would have liked myself to have seen through the situation I was in when I was in my 20s. Because I mourned that relationship for about 3 years. Those are 3 wasted years. Aside from his side of the equation, what could she have done otherwise? Let me say that again. Aside from his side of the equation, what can you do about it? What can you do about someone who's a jerk? Not much, but what can you do about yourself and your own ties to someone or what you choose to do? So, again, it comes down to what can you do? What could she have done otherwise, would you say, to have gotten out of the marriage and went on to live a normal life? I guess one has to ask just how much does blind faith, not necessarily in something, but just blind faith that God or the universe is going to save you, how helpful is that in getting us where we need to go, versus, say, taking responsibility for our own lives and working our way steadily out of a pit of despair towards some realistic, happily ever after, with foundations this time of reality made of rock, not the shifting sands of amorphous faith. I guess what I'm getting at isn't a criticism of whether you are religious or whether you believe in God, but that even more generalized sense of being positive or optimistic. How grounded is that in how positive or optimistic you should be about your reality, about your real life? Some people are optimists and it works out for them. Lucy Charles Barkley, when she ran the Ironman on a calf test, she was optimistic that she could do it, and guess what? She could. She did. Some people, like Shanann Watts, was always positive and always smiling, even towards the end of her life when inside she was crying. How useful is that kind of positivity? Is that really going to change anything? Now, I'm definitely a pessimist when it comes to, in the sense that I'm always trying to avoid negative outcomes, such as being late for a flight, not wanting to have a filling in a tooth, or getting a puncture while riding a bike. And as a result of that, I'm quite cautious. And I would say you might say it's being conservative. Some might say it's being overly cautious, but you know what? So far, I've never missed a flight. I don't have a single filling in my teeth, and I very rarely get punctures compared to everyone else. So picturing a negative outcome, not a bleak outcome, but a somewhat negative outcome, can help some people do their best work. It can prevent those negative outcomes from occurring in reality. It's just my opinion, but I believe mild pessimism is more realistic than unbridled optimism when it comes to reality. What do you think? Now, I know many of us in the true crime community can see through MICA'S EX, right? It's pretty obvious. But I want to ask you if you've trusted someone specifically in the true crime genre, in the true crime community, in the true crime area. You've trusted them to tell you the truth, to inform you, to deliver the facts, unbiased and evidence-based. Did you ever feel misled? That you were misled in a cynical way? You were basically scammed. In other words, I'm asking you, are there Pastor John Pauls amongst us, right here in the true crime community? Would you know them if you saw or heard them? Or are you blinded by faith? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.